I'd been on the road all day, with only the headlights of passing cars and the dark landscape for company. It was supposed to be a simple trip, a quick visit to my friend's place in a neighboring town. But a last-minute work call kept me late, and by the time I got on the road, night had already fallen. There's something about driving alone at night that can make even the most familiar roads feel alien. The streetlights thinned out as I left the main road, and soon, I was alone on a stretch of highway that seemed to cut straight through nothingness. Just the occasional flicker of headlights in my rearview mirror, then total darkness. About halfway through my drive, I noticed a figure on the side of the road, illuminated by my high beams. It was a man standing still with his thumb pointed skyward. He looked like he was in his late 20s or early 30s, dressed in dark clothing that blended into the shadows. Something in me said to keep driving, but I slowed anyway. I'm not sure if it was the fact that he looked stranded or the odd, blank look on his face. As I pulled over, he jogged up to the passenger window. I cracked it just enough to hear him out. "Hey, thanks for stopping. My car broke down a few miles back, and my phone's dead. I just need a ride to the next town," he said, his voice steady and calm, almost too calm. Something about him was off, but it felt rude to just drive off now. I hesitated, my fingers tapping the steering wheel. "Hop in, I guess." He slid into the passenger seat, and I couldn't help but notice his scent. A mix of stale cigarettes and something else I couldn't place, something metallic. I tried to ignore it as I pulled back onto the road. The silence in the car was thick. He didn't talk, and neither did I, but I kept stealing glances at him. He was sitting too still, staring straight ahead with wide, unblinking eyes. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, and I realized they were trembling slightly. "So, where exactly are you headed?" I finally asked, just to break the silence. "Oh, just down the road," he said, his gaze shifting to meet mine. His eyes were hollow, like he hadn't slept in days. "Just keep driving." His voice was flat, almost monotone. My hands tightened around the wheel, and my instincts screamed at me that I'd made a mistake. I glanced over and noticed his hands again, this time seeing something I hadn't before. A dark stain smeared across his knuckles. "Blood? Are you all right, man?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Did you hurt yourself or something?" He just smiled, a slow, unsettling grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I'm fine," he said, his tone oddly cheerful. "Just had a bit of a rough day." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. I tried to focus on the road, but I could feel his gaze on me. I was desperately scanning the roadside for any signs of a gas station, a house, anything where I could pull over and drop him off. But there was nothing, just miles of pitch-black road. Suddenly, he spoke up, breaking the silence again. "You ever wonder what it would feel like to die?" My stomach dropped. I forced a laugh, hoping to play it off. "Not really. I try to keep those thoughts at bay." He chuckled, a low, throaty sound. "You should try it sometime. It's enlightening." At that point, my fight-or-flight instinct kicked in. I tried to keep my face neutral as my mind raced. I had to get him out of the car, but I didn't want to make any sudden moves. "Oh, I think I missed my turn," I said, glancing at him. "I'll just pull over here and turn around." He didn't respond, just kept staring straight ahead. I slowed down, pulling the car to the shoulder. The darkness outside felt more oppressive than ever, like it was pressing in on the car. I shifted into park, my hand trembling on the gear shift. "All right, I think I'm good from here," I said, forcing a smile. "You can get out here, and I'll figure out where I need to go." He didn't move. Instead, he leaned in close, his face inches from mine, his breath warm and sour against my skin. "Thanks for the ride," he whispered. His tone was so strange, so calm. "But I'm not getting out." "Not yet." Panic set in. I didn't wait for him to finish speaking. I hit the unlock button and threw open my door, bolting out into the night. I could hear him behind me, the sound of his door slamming as he followed. I ran to the other side of the car, heart hammering in my chest as I tried to put some distance between us. But he didn't chase me. Instead, he stood by the open passenger door, watching me with that same eerie smile. "See you around," he called out, his voice fading as he stepped back into the darkness. I didn't wait to see where he went. I jumped back in the car, locked the doors, and peeled out, not caring if I was driving too fast. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, adrenaline coursing through me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but he was gone, vanished into the night. For the rest of the drive, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting him to appear again. The feeling didn't leave me until I reached the safety of my friend's driveway, where I finally took a shaky breath, realizing just how close I'd come to something I couldn't explain. To this day, I can still see his face in my mind, that twisted smile and hollow stare. And sometimes, late at night, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, wondering if he's still out there, waiting by the roadside for his next ride. The sky was a deep shade of purple when I pulled onto the empty stretch of highway. My phone had died a while back, and I was far from familiar roads, somewhere deep in the countryside, surrounded by nothing but silent fields. I hadn't passed another car for miles, and the road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly. Then I saw her, a girl no older than 20, standing on the side of the road, her thumb outstretched in a hesitant way. She looked like she'd been walking for hours, and there was something almost desperate in her eyes as my headlights washed over her. I knew better than to pick up strangers, but I found myself slowing down anyway. Maybe it was the hour, or the way she looked, small and helpless under the open sky. As I rolled down the window, she leaned in. Her clothes were torn, her hair a tangled mess, and her face was streaked with something. Dirt, maybe, or makeup that had run from crying. She looked frail, exhausted, and yet there was a determined glint in her eyes. "Where are you headed?" I asked, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "Just anywhere away from here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I could see her glance nervously back over her shoulder before she climbed into the car, her hands clutching a small bag to her chest. She let out a long breath as she sank into the seat, and for a while, neither of us spoke. "So, where exactly are you coming from?" I asked, trying to ease the tension. She shook her head. "I don't think you'd believe me." I glanced at her, but she was staring straight ahead, her hands twisting the strap of her bag. "Try me," I said, keeping my tone light. She hesitated, looking out the window as if expecting something, or someone, to appear from the darkness. "I was at a party," she said, her voice barely audible. "Somewhere in the woods. It was supposed to be fun. But things got strange." "Strange how?" She took a deep breath, clutching her bag tighter. "They started chanting," she said, her voice trembling. "At first, I thought it was some kind of joke, but then they brought out these symbols carved into wood and started passing them around. They said it was some ritual, that everyone who came had to participate." My stomach tightened. The way she spoke, the fear laced into each word, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "I didn't want to stay," she continued, her voice barely a whisper now. "But when I tried to leave, they blocked the way. They told me I couldn't leave until it was over. I managed to sneak out when they were distracted, but I know they'll come looking for me." She turned to face me, her eyes wide and pleading. "Please, you have to get me as far from here as possible." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. I nodded, pressing my foot a little harder on the gas pedal. The road ahead was empty, stretching out like a dark ribbon into the distance, and all I could think about was getting as far from here as possible. After a while, I glanced at her again. She'd relaxed a little, but her grip on the bag hadn't loosened. I wanted to ask more questions, but something told me to keep quiet. Maybe it was the way her gaze kept darting back to the road behind us, or the way her shoulders tensed every time we passed a road sign. Then, out of nowhere, she spoke up. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice a little steadier now. "Most people wouldn't have stopped." "Don't mention it," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just glad I could help." We drove in silence for a while longer until I noticed something odd. A car in the distance behind us. At first, it was just a small speck in the rearview mirror, but as I kept driving, it started getting closer. I sped up, thinking maybe it was just someone else on the highway, but then I noticed the car's headlights flashing, once, twice, almost as if they were signaling us. "Are you expecting anyone?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Her face went pale. She looked out the back window, and I could see the panic setting in. "It's them," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They must have found me." A cold sweat broke out over me as I watched the car gain on us, closing the distance with an unnatural speed. The headlights were blinding, casting eerie shadows inside my car. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my heart pounding. "What do they want from you?" I managed to ask, keeping my eyes on the road. "I don't know," she whispered, her hands clutching the bag even tighter. "They kept saying it was fate, that I was chosen. I don't know what they meant. I just want to go home." The car behind us blared its horn, a long, echoing sound that filled the night. They were close now, close enough that I could see two figures through their windshield, their faces obscured but clearly staring right at us. Without thinking, I pushed the gas pedal to the floor. My car roared as we surged forward, but the other car matched our speed effortlessly, sticking to us like a shadow. My heart raced as we flew down the dark highway, the other car still hot on our tail. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her reach into her bag, pulling out a small wooden symbol, carved with strange, intricate designs. She held it up, her hands shaking, as if it held some kind of power over them. The car behind us swerved, its headlights flashing erratically before it fell back, giving us a little distance. For a brief moment, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe we could actually get away. But then, the other car's headlights turned off. I kept glancing in the mirror, but there was nothing, just darkness, like they'd vanished. I let out a shaky breath, easing off the gas a little. We were both silent, waiting, but the road stayed empty. Did that actually work? I finally asked, glancing over at her. She looked down at the wooden symbol in her hands, her expression unreadable. "I don't know," she murmured, "but I hope I never have to find out." We drove the rest of the way in silence, the night eerily quiet now, as if whatever had been following us had disappeared into thin air. When we reached the nearest town, she thanked me and got out, disappearing into the darkness without looking back. I never learned her name or what exactly she'd escaped from that night, but as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching, waiting in the shadows along that empty stretch of road, waiting for someone else to wander into its grasp.